told you love was gentle. They forgot what it can do when it's hungry. They say every god was born for balance, but balance was never the way of the heart. Love came first, raw, unmeasured, divine. It burned through silence and gave birth to light. They called her Hathor, the Eye of Ra, the first joy the sun ever knew. Yet even the sun, in all its radiance, casts a shadow when it loves too fiercely. Before names were spoken, Ra looked upon his creation and felt the ache of emptiness. So he tore a piece from his own eye, his own seam, and gave it life. From that wound came Hathor, warmth made flesh, laughter given form. She was not born to destroy, she was born to complete him. Where Ra commanded, she comforted. Where he blazed, she softened. Through her, creation learned how to feel. But in her birth, something shifted. When the god gave his eye away, he also gave away the power to look upon himself. The heavens rejoiced. The earth awoke beneath her voice. Every heart that touched her became drunk on the sweetness of her light. They sang her name as if it were a promise that joy could never fade. Yet love, when adored too much, begins to crave more of itself. The laughter grew louder, the praise unending, and the goddess began to listen, not to the heart of Ra, but to the echo of her own reflection. The first hunger stirred, not for power, but for recognition. For to be adored is to risk forgetting who first adored you. The sun dimmed, the air thickened. Ra felt her light grow heavy, untamed. The joy that once healed now throbbed with unrest. Something within her began to ask, if I bring life, can I not also take it away? It was a question the universe had never heard before. A question born not from hate, but from longing. Love had turned to hunger, not for destruction, but for meaning. In her perfection, she found herself unseen, the goddess who gave joy to all, yet felt none of. That was the moment she looked inward and saw not the sun's reflection, but her own. Every god begins as an answer, but answers, when loved too deeply, become their own questions. And so began Hathor's descent, not from grace, but from innocence. The moment joy looked back at itself and wondered why it still ached. Love was never gentle. It only pretended to be, until it learned to hunger. What happens when your kindness begins to devour you? When she laughed, the Nile rose to meet her. Joy has a sound, and it began with her breath. The moment Hathor laughed, the air itself trembled. Cattle bowed, women sang. The river stretched its arms toward her reflection, as if even water longed to be touched by her warmth. In her presence, the world remembered how to feel alive. The temples of Dendera rose like open palms. Incense drifted through corridors where dancers moved in circles, their bodies echoing the rhythm of her heart. They called her the Golden One, the Mistress of Jubilation, the Lady of the Sycamore. Through her, every feast became sacred, every kiss a hymn, every melody a prayer that pulsed through the Nile's current. Even the gods turned their faces toward her, for joy, once born, is as commanding as light itself, and Ra, watching, felt pride. Love became devotion. Devotion became dependence. The mortals no longer looked to the sun that sustained them. They looked only to the goddess who made them feel. They built songs for her, carved her smile into walls, poured honey and wine in her honor, offerings not of reverence, but of desire. Her name was no longer whispered, it was chanted. The echo filled the earth like thunder clothed in sweetness. Hathor shone brighter than the one who birthed her, and in that brilliance, joy began to eclipse its source. It is a strange thing to be loved too much. What once nourishes begins to consume. The laughter that healed began to sound like worship. And worship, when endless, starts to hollow the heart. Ra watched as their prayers to him faded. He saw his reflection, once radiant, swallowed by the light of his own creation, the god of the sun, forgotten in daylight. Hathor's name rose with every dawn. His silence deepened with every dusk. For the first time, the goddess looked upon the faces of those who adored her and saw not devotion, but need. They wanted her joy because they had lost their own. Their praise became hunger, their songs, cages of gold. And within her heart, something stirred, a quiet ache. Was she giving joy or only feeding emptiness? Was she loved or merely used to remember love's shape? The laughter that once lifted the world began to sound heavy in her throat. Every light eventually wonders if it's being seen or simply used to see. Every giver, if they're still giving or being taken from. The goddess of love stood in her own glory and felt the weight of being wanted. When she laughed, the Nile rose to meet her. But in the stillness after, she wondered, when others worship your light, do they see you or themselves? The laughter stopped. The sky began to bleed. Every joy, when stretched too far, finds its breaking point. Even the light must one day burn the world it loves. The laughter that once carried across the Nile faded, not in sound, but in faith. For the hearts that once sang to Hathor began to mock her silence. They forgot who she was, who gave them breath, who watched them grow beneath her warmth. And when gods are forgotten, they remember. The story begins not with anger, but with heartbreak. Ra, old and weary, looked upon mankind and saw their arrogance. They no longer feared him. They no longer cared for the laws that held the world in balance. So he called upon his eye, the power that had once brought him comfort, and he sent it down to remind the earth what creation costs. Hathor heard the command, and something inside her shifted. Love answered, but it did not sound like mercy. The air thickened as her form changed. Her laughter twisted, her grace hardened. The goddess who once danced in gold now moved in crimson. They called her Sekhmet, the lioness, the fire of the desert, the eye that sees without pity. She walked through the fields of men and tasted the fragility of their breath. Each heartbeat she silenced echoed like a hymn reversed. The Nile ran dark, carrying whispers of her name. This was not rage. It was love stripped of gentleness, the justice of a heart unacknowledged. For days, she did not stop. The world trembled beneath her devotion. Ra watched from above, his creation dissolving in the very love he unleashed. The gods pleaded, but none could calm her. She was no longer the giver of life, she had become its witness. And witnessing too much can turn compassion into hunger. The lioness drank what the heart could no longer bear. In the reflection of blood, she saw herself, radiant still, yet unrecognizable. Her purpose had become her prison. To love without restraint was to destroy, and to destroy was to feel something again. For the first time, Hathor's joy and Sekhmet's fury shared the same face. There was no difference now between creation and undoing. Only the ache to be seen, even through fear. The gods feared her. The mortals fled. Yet in that silence, she found truth. The world remembers what it fears longer than what it loves. And perhaps that was her answer all along. The laughter stopped. The sky began to bleed. When your compassion is ignored, what part of you wakes up to destroy? They poured wine for the goddess, and she drank her reflection. Even the gods know, no fire can be killed with force. It must be taught to see itself. The earth lay quiet, bruised under the sun's red gaze. Sekhmet's breath still lingered on the wind, hot, heavy, endless. Every heartbeat left alive trembled in silence, waiting for mercy that would not come. So the gods made a plan not of war, but of illusion. They gathered the red wine in secret, barrels upon barrels, enough to flood the plain where she walked. And when the dawn came, they poured it out like an offering, a river of crimson, glistening in the light. From the heavens, it looked like blood. To a goddess still lost in hunger, it looked like victory. The trap was set, not to deceive her heart, but to remind it. Sekhmet approached. Her paws sank into the red tide. The scent rose, thick and sweet. She bent low and drank. Once, then again. The taste was unfamiliar, soft, alive, almost human. She drank more, until her fury began to blur. The roar faded into breath, the breath into laughter. And through the haze of wine and memory, she saw her reflection moving beneath the surface. Not the lioness, but the woman she had once been. The eye of Ra blinked, and in that moment, the two halves of her, the giver and the taker, the warmth and the wound, recognized each other. The world seemed to exhale. The blood-red light of the sky softened to gold. Her body swayed with the rhythm of her own heartbeat, slow, returning. She laughed again, not the laughter of delight, nor madness, but of remembrance. The sound that once raised rivers now carried a fragile peace. Love and wrath were never enemies. They were sisters, sharing the same pulse, one creating, the other protecting. The same fire that warmed could burn. The same compassion that healed could break. To destroy had not been her fall. It was her mirror. And in it, she saw the cost of being divine. To love the world so deeply that even punishment feels like mercy. She was Hathor again, not innocent, not pure, but whole. Every being who has ever raged knows this truth. The fury that blinds is often grief in disguise. To forgive oneself is to drink from the same cup that once spilled your pain. And in that drinking, you remember you were always both, the hand that gives and the heart that wounds. They poured wine for the goddess, and she drank her reflection. Can you love yourself without silencing your darker halves? In forgetting her name, she found her face. Memory is mercy until it isn't. Even gods must forget to begin again. When the blood dried and the laughter returned, the world spoke her name with gratitude. Hathor, they called, the beautiful one, the restorer of life. Yet somewhere within, the echo of Sekhmet still breathed. Names can heal the past, but they cannot erase the sound of it. She wandered the temples of Dendera once more. The walls still glowed with her image, the dancing goddess, crowned with sun and cow horns. Every carving smiled back at her, yet each smile felt slightly off, slightly too sure. She touched the stone, tracing the outline of her own divinity, and wondered what it meant to be remembered by a world that never saw the cost of her return. They worshipped her gentleness. They sang of her laughter. None spoke of the river she had painted red. Perhaps it was easier that way. Still, there were moments, fleeting, unspoken, when the warmth trembled. When the music grew too loud, she would hear the low hum of a roar buried beneath it. A rhythm older than joy, older than forgiveness. She would close her eyes and see not the dancers, but the silence that followed them. Not the wine, but the reflection beneath it. The memory of a lioness pacing within her chest. How does one carry peace when their shadow still remembers the taste of fear? She began to understand that her divinity was not singular. It was fractured light, shifting across time. The goddess of love, the goddess of wrath, the goddess who forgot which was which. Each face belonged to her, and yet none entirely. She was no longer merely the eye of Ra. She was the gaze turned inward, the part of the divine that dares to see itself. And in that seeing, she found something more fragile than holiness: acceptance. Hathor realized that forgetting was not a loss, it was protection. To forget one's name is to make room for truth. And in her namelessness, she met herself again, not his goddess, not his destroyer, but his being. Every joy she brought carried the memory of ruin. Every act of kindness whispered of the rage it took to survive. To love was no longer her purpose, it was her confession. In that duality, she mirrored every heart that ever lived. We call it divinity, but perhaps it is only the courage to hold contradiction without shattering. The laughter that once lifted nations now trembled with memory. And yet, in that trembling, there was truth. The kind that makes even gods feel human. In forgetting her name, she found her face. Which version of you do you fear the world might see? She no longer sought devotion, only understanding. Some gods are born in light, others in the remembering of their own shadow. Hathor rose with the sun, not as the goddess she once was, but as the one she had become. The world looked up and saw radiance. She looked inward and saw balance. The Nile shimmered beneath her gaze. Villages rebuilt their altars. The air filled again with hymns and laughter. Her temples rose where sorrow had once settled. In Dendera, in Memphis, in the quiet breath between mourning and song. She watched the people dance, their joy trembling like light across the river's skin. Once, she had been the force that punished them. Now, she was the reason they still believed in dawn. Perhaps that is what love becomes when it survives destruction. Not purity, the presence. Yet even in peace, memory lingered. Every cup of wine poured in her name carried a hint of red, too deep to forget. Every melody that praised her joy echoed faintly with grief. The people sang of love, but love had changed. It was no longer the soft, golden thing they remembered. It had teeth now, gentle ones, but still capable of truth. What is devotion worth if it cannot bear to see the whole of what it worships? Hathor did not seek to be worshipped anymore. She became the space between contrasts, the laughter that knows loss, the kindness that remembers power. Even Ra looked upon her and saw not the eye he once commanded, but the mirror that now met his gaze. She had learned what few gods dared to. To love is not to forget wrath. It is to hold it without letting it rule. Forgiveness was no longer something she granted others. It was what she whispered to herself. Her temples became sanctuaries of paradox. Laughter and mourning shared the same incense. Priests sang to the balance she embodied. Love that endures imperfection. Faith that bends instead of breaking. The myth no longer asked the people to choose between Hathor and Sekhmet. It taught them to recognize both within themselves. Because the divine was never about perfection. It was about wholeness. And wholeness, she learned, is the courage to stay when every part of you is revealed. Now, at dawn, when the light spills over the Nile, her reflection no longer hides from her. The water shivers, gold dissolves into blue, and for a moment, the goddess smiles at herself. She does not ask for offerings, only remembrance. Not of her beauty, nor her fury, but of her becoming. Because even divinity must learn to forgive itself. She no longer sought devotion, only understanding. What if the parts you hide are the ones that make you whole? If this story stirred something in you, let it stay. Because myths are not ancient, they are remembering you. If you felt her truth, share it. Let others remember that love and shadow are the same pulse. Subscribe for more forgotten gods and the stories that still breathe inside you.